One of my favorite fake quotes. You have fake quotes out there, right? We know what those are. They're quotes that are attributed to somebody that aren't true. It's like, don't believe everything on the internet, said Abraham Lincoln. It's that sort of thing. Pops up from time to time for me from years ago in Facebook memories. It's attributed to the Buddha. And the Buddha never said it. It goes, the trouble is, you think you have time. Even though the Buddha never said it, it's a kind of contemporary language that points to a spiritual teaching that's pretty close to what the Buddha actually taught. In all the passing of our days and years, we tend to parcel out our lives as if their time were a central truth to our spirit. It's the kind of thinking that leads to pain and suffering, which is what the Buddha taught about. Living by the clock, thinking by the clock, and waiting by the clock. I got one right on my arm here, and I've looked at it 3 times during the service to see where I was. So I'm preaching to my own choir right now. And waiting by the clock is one of the most painful ways of living. We all have that happen to us so often in our lives. We're waiting for the job offer that never seems to come, or college acceptance letters seem to travel at the speed of snails, or we're grappling with the possibility of having to accept that a serious illness may have just entered our family. Everything else seems to go out of focus, and we fixate on the thing that will somehow validate us, or show us the way forward, or redefine all our future days. If X happens, then Y will be glorious. We're waiting for the map to unfold and make clear where our path will take us. Who we are while we're waiting doesn't seem to matter to us any longer. Only come what may seems to matter us. What is the thing we're waiting for becomes all of our identity. But sometimes it's much less serious. Sometimes we get distracted by triviality, or get sucked into another person's opinion of us. Remember middle school? Anyone? Right? Okay. Or define our day by 1,000 small things. Is this reverbing? Or does it sound fine to you? A little bit? Any better? Nominally? Okay. Well, I don't hear it, so it's better for me. If it's not worse for you, we're good. In a very real way, a million magical things happen every moment we're here to see them, or hear them, or feel them, or breathe them. Our kids' laughter, the love of a partner, the life that teems all around us. Breath itself, a completely miraculous gift. We only notice when it's hard to find. And that has another layer for me as someone with asthma. I forget about it until it's gone. When you hear me speak of reverence in my sermons, it's all of these things that I point to. It's the feeling of another sun rising through no fault of our own. And it's a feeling many of us experience toward God, for those that believe. It's one aim of religion to help us to come to a place where we can appreciate the subtle awareness without getting too caught up defining it. There will always be 1,000 distractions, some small, some very serious. But how we connect with a sense of reverence in our daily living will determine the depth of our life, whether you believe in God or not. Having a sense of reverence for life matters. It's not just a witticism for the spiritually enlightened, for lack of a better phrase. I hope my hand swag was enough to tell you my thought about enlightened. It's practical advice for daily living, for remembering what actually matters, and what makes us think we don't matter as we are right now. What matters and what makes us think we don't matter right now, both. The practical advice for daily living is that in times of change or stress or extra effort, we must be extra diligent to find room in our hearts for reverence, or we're going to burn out. And what we sought to nurture or protect will become a burden we begin to wish we could just drop. And soon we may just drop it. And maybe we have to. That's true sometimes too. We can't do everything, right? We can avoid this by developing spiritual practices that draw us to experience a sense of gratitude in our lives. What might feel like a daily dose of triage at first can transform into a healthy regimen. In the months to come, we will focus, my part in the ministry here at Community Church will be focusing on growing more opportunities for the disciplines of spiritual practice. I know that we already have groups that meet for meditation and for breathing yoga, I believe, throughout the week. And we continue to offer small group ministries, what we here call Wellspring, which are groups of 6 to 10 people, where there's some prep work for shared study, and then there's collaborative learning with each other. So it's collaborative spiritual direction with each other. And right now I host all of them. Down the line, I hope to have other folks host some more too as we grow. And we're going to be adding groups in September. And the groups that continue will be going into another session in the fall. I think we've averaged about 15 congregants this past year, and I would honestly prefer if we have twice that number or 3 times that number. So if you're in one, please consider continuing, and if you're not in one, ask Leslie over on my left, your right, how awesome they are. There are other people too, but she's the only one here that's in it right now. I'm sorry to volunteer you, but she's been a committed attendee and it's been great. Plus I get to know people in these groups in ways that I don't get to know from being here on Sunday. I'll be again preparing the sessions this year. Check it out, consider making this commitment to spiritual practices, and more information will come out later this month. And this August we'll be doing a deep dive in this August on Sundays. I will, through August and Labor Day, I'll be preaching, I think, 5 times and doing a deep dive in our theology and principles during worship as I'm preparing a preaching series on our principles and our religious philosophies. So if you're new to UU, it's a great way for a primer. And if you've been around a long time, it probably will help you to finally memorize what our principles are. And I will not quiz any of you on them right now. Faith formation is a lifelong practice, and religious communities thrive over the long haul best when its members focus on those things. As we deepen, as we share, as we learn from one another, we grow as a community. It's not just about the wisdom of the pulpit, but it's also about our shared learnings and movements, whether it's knowledge or wisdom or right relations or how we live in the covenant. As we mature together, learning from one another, the community grows as well. A shared practice, a shared sense of self are key to our health and success. Shared practices, traditions, and values are vital and transformative for building lasting, meaningful communities that matter in our lives. I invite you to seriously consider making such a commitment in the months and seasons that come for Wellspring. It's a really vibrant program, and I'd love to get to know you all better. Building community is the most vital spiritual practice we can commit to, especially at this time in this nation when communities are fractured and we're splitting over partisanship and ideological lines. Most of our folks grow up in age-based schools and don't interact with any other generation outside of their own family, outside of church. We are segregated and segregated and segregated. Building community is the most vital spiritual practice we can commit to, and our broader world needs it even more than ever. You'll often note that with all of our spiritual practices, I will often use different ways of talking about the same things. This afternoon alone, it's amazing. I've been here for a year and a half, and I'm still saying morning when I write these sermons, and it's in the afternoon, sorry. This afternoon alone, I've already said prayer, meditation, reverence, and gratitude. For some of us, that's a given. And for others, it can be a challenge. It's not language that feels comfortable to us. Openness in times of change can be a discipline all in itself. I am forever less concerned in the details of creed as I am in the experience of a meaningful practice. There are many truths. I hope that we can each be renewed by our Sunday services, each in our own way. That time of silence can give us the breather we need, while times of movement and ritual can energize, which is why, in part, that we have sacred dance, at least monthly, and encourage all of us to make a joyful noise as best we want in a given day. Where one thing may not speak to us, may we learn to appreciate how it very well may be speaking to the person who's sitting right next to us. Each of us matter, and we strive to make room for all of us to be fed. If this week's sermon doesn't speak to you, or the fans aren't cooling you off enough, they're not cooling me off enough either, next week probably will, and know that somebody here today needed this message, and that's true every Sunday. Robert Latham, he's an author. You may have read a book of his, like Everything I Ever Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. He also happens to be a UU minister. And he talks about this in a slightly different way. He suggests that the old trinity of Unitarian thought, that we're grounded in freedom, reason, and tolerance, is probably not the best matrix to be relying on. Freedom, reason, tolerance. To put it briefly, saying we're free implies anyone who hasn't joined our faith isn't themselves free, and that's not our mindset. Everyone has their own, attachment to wisdom. It's not a statement that's very generous of spirit or the traditions. Where reason will always be important to us, it only touches upon one half of our mind, or maybe less, depending on how important you rate virtues such as compassion and empathy. And tolerance, try to think of a time in your life where you said out loud, I am so grateful that they tolerated me. I never said it. No one likes being tolerated. At best, it's the baby step toward living with the respect for the world around us. And this is freedom, reason, and tolerance is our litmus test from the 1800s and the 1900s. Reverend Latham asks us to measure our faith by another standard. He suggests, and I think I preached about this my first sermon here in a different context a year and a half ago, but I'm going to go back to it. Openness, mindfulness, and reverence is his triptych. Openness, mindfulness, reverence. Those three words are central to each sermon I write, even if you don't hear me say those words. I've talked at length about the first and the third already, openness and reverence. And mindfulness is a general awareness of what's going on before us, blended with our more intuitive core. It's being present to what's before us. Like I've quipped a few times in this service already that I'm hot, and I can joke about it, but I can also just be like, okay, I'm present to this reality and move through it. And there was a breeze of fan that just came by me, great. But not fixating on being hot, but just being aware of being hot. That's a small kind of thing to it, but it's part of mindfulness. The triad is a spiritual practice in itself. It can directly help us in times of stress and change. Anyone going through stress or change right now? Okay. Whether the matter is frivolous or life-changing. The practice of openness can save us from some arguments with friends, fellow congregants, or maybe on a good day, our families. It's hard to assume good intentions with all the world. It's hard to accept that there might be another way of seeing something when our feelings have been hurt or we've been asked to change. Some long-standing practice that's core in our life, or that we think is core in our life. And in religious community, at least in our Unitarian Universalist traditions, we are called to be open, especially this millennia. We don't necessarily need to change our minds, but our faith demands of us that we don't come to the table with our minds made up, and that we do so knowing that we're at the table in relation to the people around us. So we're not coming to the table for an argument, but we're coming to the table for a connection, and we'll figure out what the answer is going to be. The practice of mindfulness asks us not to do 1,000 things at once. For some of us, not doing 1,000 things at once is a really hard thing to not do. It also involves allowing our reason to dance with our heart. When we get lost in our emotions to the point where we can't see the road before us, or we endlessly fidget with all the options ahead of us, emotions, thinking, mindfulness calls us back to a place of centeredness. Thinking's fine, emotions are fine, but how do we stay centered in that midst? We can appreciate the feelings and the challenges without losing our place in the world. We already have a place in the world. The struggles and the challenges before us do not define our values or our value. We are already of value. A practice of reverence may be the most countercultural act we can ever make in our consumer-driven world. Messages and media, public pressure and finances all urge us to gain the next thing, to desire what we can't have over the gifts before us, to be consumers in our world rather than citizens. Reverence informs us all that that is fleeting, that the quest for the shiny new toy is the least way to experience our lives. Or in the words of my mentor, who's now deceased, Reverend Forrest Church of All Souls on the Upper East Side, we ought to want what we have. Want what you have. He also says, be who you are and do what you can. Want what you have, be who you are, do what you can. Reverence teaches us to value what is always before us. We can stay centered through our lives, mostly centered, because of our disciplines, our spiritual disciplines. I try to stay open to the ebb and flow of frick and frack in my day, knowing that there's always a story hidden behind every challenge. I seek to remain mindful that this and that will sometime pass. And I seek ways to appreciate the beauty in our world. You know, before the pandemic, and this is going to be an admission a bit publicly, some of the folks in Wellspring groups know this already. Before the pandemic, it was for about 21 years, it was the rarest day ever, aside from illness, that I wasn't walking in a silent meditation for 3 miles a day. That practice calmed and centered me, along with reminding me that my soul is not defined by my work. I'm not a machine here to accomplish things. You're not a machine here to accomplish things. But a spirit that is here to encounter other spirits. Often I feel like I don't have the time to walk. I mean, during the pandemic, I just gave up. But before that, I often felt like I don't have the time to do that walk. And on those but I remember there's an old rabbinical teaching. I pray every day for an hour, except for the days when I'm too busy. On those days, I pray for 2 hours. And I took that very much to heart. As it happens, I also pray every evening, though I promise you not for 2 hours. And publicly today, I promise to return to that practice of walking again for my own spiritual health and for my own physical health and for also my ability to do my work. I mean, there has to be a way where you check out of the grind, whatever that grind is, whether it's art or poetry or reading or walking or the gym. There's got to be something that you do that takes you apart from the everyday routine. I'll share with you in closing these words by Max Kopp. Carry the sacred flame to make light the windows of the world. It is we who must be keepers of the flame. It is we who must carry the imperishable fire. It is our watch now. It is our watch now. Keeping the flame of progressive faith alive is not solely about social justice or being a voice for the oppressed or healing the pains of the world. It is all of these things for sure. And it is also keeping our own inner flame alive, loved, and vibrant. May we seek ways to practice the discipline of spirituality, and may we do so with gladness in our hearts and kindness on our lips. For the care for the world we live in, we must first care for our own sagging shoulders and our own weary grins, knowing that we never do so